Hello, listeners of Analyze Asia. This is your host, Carol, and welcome back to another episode of Analyze Asia, a podcast dedicated to dissecting the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. For the past few episodes, we've been looking at China. And so this time around, we are going to switch our gaze back to Southeast Asia. And that is why we've invited a longtime friend of Analyze Asia, Rama Mamuaya, the founder and CEO of DailySocial, onto our show today. Welcome back to Analyze Asia, Rama.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me again, Carol.
And this is actually the first time that we've spoken to each other, right? Even though you've been on the show before. So can you introduce yourself a little bit more and also tell our listeners a bit more about DailySocial?
Sure. So my name is Rama. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called DailySocial.id, based in Jakarta, Indonesia. One of the highlights of Southeast Asia, the hottest city in Southeast Asia when it comes to startups and technology for the past few years. So my company mainly do media research and consulting. So we have a media site where you can go to our website, DailySocial.id, and get the latest news on what's happening in the tech ecosystem here in Indonesia. We also do research for clients in terms of technology-related research. We also do consulting work where we help corporate companies connect with the startup ecosystem.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I see that you guys are very active on Twitter as well. So since your last conversation on Analyze Asia, what have you been up to?
We actually spun a few of our efforts. We just launched a company called DS Innovate, which is the research and consulting company, into a separate entity. Previously, it was kind of integrated with the same company. And, we've been launching lots and lots of reports when it comes to tech data in Indonesia. The demand is still high for any type of technology data, basically, technology-related data. So we've been launching, I think since the last time I spoke at Analyse, we've launched over 50 new reports with all kinds of data on the market, Indonesia tech market.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm curious, we can't avoid a conversation about COVID and how COVID has impacted the ecosystems. So I'm curious, how has the Indonesia startup scene been changed by the pandemic in 2020?
It's been quite fascinating, actually. So we just did our latest report. We just collected the report from, all the events happening into 2020. Actually, the number of investment announced in 2020 is around the same compared to 2019. I think the 2019 was 113 funding announcements. In 2020, it's like 112. So just by one, right? If you consider the whole pandemic, the whole financial crisis, it's actually quite good. But what's more amazing is the number of money injected into Indonesian companies is actually up by 11% compared to 2019, which is amazing. So I think this shows that, even though the pandemic really hit a lot of companies, pretty hard. A few companies shut down because of the pandemic as well, due to low consumer demand, for companies that in the travel sector and all that stuff. But there are digital transformation startups, what I like to call digital transformation startups, that are gaining traction quite heavily in Indonesia. Companies who are basically taking the offline traditional process into digitalized process. Because of the pandemic, most of the employees are working from home. So companies that do HR, finance, accounting, but people can work remotely using these kind of tools. Those guys are gaining a lot of traction. In general, it's quite positive news from Indonesia because of the pandemic. Of course, a few companies shut down, but in general, it's quite good.
That's really good news. It's good to hear. I think people, are betting on Indonesia's future, a digital future at that, that's for sure. Today, we are here to talk about the merger of Gojek and Tokopedia. While our audience is probably familiar with Grab and Gojek and their ongoing war in the ride-hailing, food delivery, and financial payment space, etc., can you first provide us an introduction to Tokopedia? Because some of our listeners might not be as familiar with this leading e-commerce provider from Indonesia.
Sure. So Tokopedia is, founded as a online marketplace. One of the early online marketplace players in Indonesia. They started around the same time to another company with a similar model called Bukalapak. But Tokopedia, they're very focused on service. So they're slightly more expensive compared to Bukalapak, but the service has been amazing, and that's their kind of marketing strategy from the day they launch. They don't believe in discounts and free delivery, all that stuff. They just want to make sure that the company is growing and focusing on service and keeping the customers happy, and that has been a big part of what makes Tokopedia, again, now I think definitely one of the biggest technology company in Indonesia. They're very well funded, obviously. Their latest valuation is 7.5 billion. Again, this is an unofficial number because there's no real number that published by Tokopedia or their investors. Their latest funding is their Series E in late last year, 2020, led by Google, Temasek, and Sequoia Capital India also participate. And they have a whole bunch of strong investors that line up since their seed funding in 2018 taken. So from the very early days, they really rank up all the some of the best investment companies in Indonesia, most active, most lots of mentors in their pockets, right? Companies like East Ventures, BNOS Partners, Cyber Agent, and then of course there's this Alibaba Group, SoftBank from their Vision Fund also invested in Tokopedia.
Right. And if my memory serves me correct, their Tokopedia is probably has the second highest valuation as a unicorn, as an Indonesian unicorn behind Gojek, right? I'm curious, who are the founders and investors behind Tokopedia? I know you mentioned a few of the investors. How has the company evolved since, SoftBank and Alibaba's, I believe, 1.5 billion investment into the company way back? And like you talked about, a recent investment from, Temasek, Google, etc., at 500 million, I believe.
Yeah, sure. So the founder is the CEO and founder. His name is William Tanuwijaya. I've actually known him since the early days of Tokopedia back in 2008, 2009. He's a computer science student and from Bina Nusantara University. Well, they're actually a quite humble beginning, compared to the founders of Gojek with US educated. So both founders of Tokopedia has been a role model for homegrown technology founders. Yeah, they're really great guys and very smart, very calm. They don't like publicity, but they keep your heads down and work, right, achieve what it is that you want to achieve. And they're highly influenced by Jack Ma. Even from the early days, William cannot stop talking about the influence of Jack Ma into he adopted a lot of his framework into running Tokopedia. And lucky enough, Alibaba actually invests in Tokopedia as well. So it was a dream come true for
That's right.
For William. In terms of the investors, I think some of the later stage investor has been quite significant, kind of shaped Tokopedia's decision making and expansion. For the past few years, they've been trying to expand to other markets, specifically in the SME market in Indonesia. In Indonesia, SME is one of the largest shadow economy, we call it. Shadow economy because, physically, in Indonesia, every 100 meters, you will find a small mom and pop kind of shop or whatever it is that they're selling. And they do transactions in cash. They don't have a bank account. They're not listed, no tax and stuff like that. So the number is there, but it's not recorded. It's not bankable. And it's a huge market all over Indonesia, not just in Jakarta. And actually, Tokopedia is one of the first unicorns to really see this potential and start to develop products to cater to this market where all these smaller mom and pop shops can start selling stuff on Tokopedia's platform, giving them access to millions and millions of potential buyers. I think the latest number in 2020 last year, they have over 10 million sellers across the board all over Indonesia, which is huge.
That's right.
Part of that is actually from the SME effort that they are pushing. Now they just launched, they call it Mitra Tokopedia, which is like a program to empower the SMEs, including give like lendings and all that stuff to help these small shops to grow, providing capital and all that stuff. That's partly what Tokopedia has been doing these days, and it's really driven by some of the later stage investors and board members that is working with the government as well, because SME empowerment is actually one of the government agenda. So what for all these companies, everyone is doing it actually these days. Gojek is doing it, Traveloka is doing it, all the players are doing it. Government support is partly why the program is so massive, but Tokopedia was one of the first ones to kind of identify this market and make the first move.
So, what are some of the key businesses under Tokopedia? How does the company monetize? Are they similar in any way to, Alibaba's Taobao or Alibaba in general?
Yeah, I think Tokopedia is its own thing. It's not like Alibaba or Taobao or even Amazon in the sense. They're really their own thing because they really focus on empowering the full value chain of their ecosystem, both Tokopedia and its merchants. So this answers your question about the companies under them. So they actually have software for the merchants where every step of the process from warehousing, POS, including a software to record all the transaction, reporting every month, everything really end-to-end kind of solution for the merchants all the way until logistics, payments. As you probably know, they also have quite a big stake in a company called OVO, which is one of the largest digital payment company here in Indonesia. They co-own it with Grab as well. So Tokopedia actually back then they have their own payment gateway, Tokopay, I think they call it back then, but for some regulatory reason, it got shut down by the government, and they are kind of ended up doing business with OVO to power their payment gateway form. One of the things that Tokopedia also has been doing quite significantly is they've been acquiring startups in Indonesia, which is I think it's very good for them to be able to do that, empowering the industry as well. So I think it's quite nice that Tokopedia actually grow non-organically by acquiring these startups. They acquired a company called Bright Story. They acquired a few other companies, smaller companies before that, but I think the most high-profile one is Story.
Can you just help listeners also just understand it a little bit more? You said it's, its own thing. It's different from Alibaba, different from Taobao, different from Amazon. Can you just highlight a few more of these differences to help us, understand? Because we're not in Indonesia.
I think one of the key things about Indonesian sort of merchants, they don't want to pay. Amazon, if you're a seller, you have to pay a seller fee and stuff like that. Indonesians, we don't want to pay it. So Tokopedia is forced to charge that convenience fee to its customers, which is different with Amazon. They don't focus on B2B and kind of bulk buying kind of Taobao model. They really focus on empowering brands these days. So I think the NBA has an official store there. They have they work with Nike here in Indonesia as well. So a lot of these brands, they have their own store in Tokopedia. Ace Hardware, all those those types of brands, they have a store in Tokopedia in conjunction with their own e-commerce, right? All of them, they have e-commerce platform on a separate website that they control, but they also have store on Tokopedia, which helps to boost their transaction and expose them to Tokopedia's loyal users. I think one of the key things are those kind of differentiates Tokopedia with the other players. And Tokopedia is really focusing on empowering the SMEs, empowering the sellers, and providing all these tools. So it's a very long tail model, right? Not just focusing on the transaction fee.
That's a very good explanation. We know that, in December 2020, it was reported that Tokopedia was considering going public through a SPAC merger with Bridgetown Holdings, which is backed by Peter Thiel and Richard Lee. And the estimated valuation of this post-merger company is between, 8 to 10 billion USD. Do you think that Tokopedia will IPO through a SPAC, which is, special purpose acquisition companies? What are your thoughts on that?
I see it the other way around. It's going to be very difficult for them to go public in a traditional sense. At least here in Indonesia, their financial performance is not up to par with the government standard or the board standard for companies that are eligible to go public. Profitability, sustainability, governance, all that stuff. I've heard from secondary information that financially they won't be able to get approval for listing, at least here in Indonesia. So the only way, if they really want to go public, I think they have to go public outside of Indonesia, which is, I don't think, I've known William for quite a while. I don't think he's going to do that. He either going to go public in Indonesia or go public outside of Indonesia and Indonesia. So dual listing. But the
Gotcha.
Indonesian part is non-negotiable. William is very patriotic in that sense. Like, I think that's one of the value that kind of mirrors towards running the company and respect for that, definitely. SPAC is one of the alternative and most probable alternative actually for Tokopedia. One of Tokopedia's largest investors, companies like Hoya, SoftBank, they have a life cycle when it comes to their funds, right? And I can imagine all these investors are starting to approach the near of the cycle. I can understand if these investors starting to push Tokopedia's leadership for a potential exit strategy and or other liquidity events. I'm sure they got pushed by their limited partners as well. So I can understand that this is an important momentum for Tokopedia, but it's going to be hard for Tokopedia to go at it alone and in Indonesia. Hence, the merger actually, for me, it makes a lot of sense.
And here I want to just, switch up the conversation a little bit. When you came on to Analyze Asia last time, it was about 2.5 years ago. I had to do a little bit digging. And you came here to talk about Gojek in Indonesia. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are quite familiar with Gojek already. So can you just briefly introduce the company, but also to a certain extent discuss some of the companies such as GoPay, which has emerged from Gojek?
Gojek is, they started out as a ride-hailing company, similar to Grab, similar to Uber. But in 2017, they kind of diversified into fintech with the launch of GoPay, which is a payment platform inside the Gojek ecosystem. And that has been a monumental step for them, because it opens up a whole new door of possibilities and business opportunities for Gojek outside of the ride-hailing companies. Gojek, they're the largest unicorn in Indonesia. They have companies such as Facebook, PayPal, Visa, Google, JD.com, Tencent, KKR, Warburg Pincus. I think the latest round is by Telkomsel, which is telco company here, a subsidiary of Singtel and Telkom here in Indonesia. So yeah, they're very large, and they actually spun off the GoPay feature as a separate company. They also acquired a company called Loket.com, which is an online event company, and they spun it off into a separate product called GoPlay, which is like a Netflix for Indonesia.
Interesting.
They launched in 2018. It was a big launch, some exclusive kind of content, and I think this is a homage to the Netflix, the Amazon business model with Prime Video. Honestly, don't see the synergy there, but if it's a separate business and it's profitable, why not? They also acquire a bank here in Indonesia a few years ago. I think last year, relaunched it as a digital bank called Bank Jago.
That's super cool. I didn't know about that.
They actually bought a bank, so that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
As for, I think the latest number, Gojek has 2 million driver partners, they call it. And they have over 1 million merchant for their GoFood feature. Definitely one of the biggest technology business in Indonesia.
And we've covered Gojek in quite a few episodes here on Analyze Asia as well. And so some of our listeners might know that the founder of Gojek, Nadim, his patriotic sense with William, as well as he became the Minister of Education and Culture under Jokowi's presidency. So how do you think Gojek has evolved since Nadim's departure?
It has been lots of development post Nadim, and the new co-CEOs, Kevin and Andre. They're brilliant people. It's actually been like a lightning fast execution. I'm not sure if Nadim was involved in the strategic planning Gojek, the next 3 years of Gojek, but it's been quite extensive. Obviously, no one saw the pandemic coming.
That's
but
right.
I think they adapt quite well to the pandemic. They had to make a few adjustments. They lay off a couple of divisions, but they actually cut off some of the products as well. They had a Go Clean, so it's like Uber, but for people cleaning your house. They shut that down because of the pandemic. There's Go Massage, so time is used. They shut that down as well, non-profitable. They have Go Shop as well, shut down, and really focusing on features like GoFood and GoPay. And obviously GoFood has been on a rocket ship for the past few months because everyone's staying at home and not going to restaurants. To buy things online, and GoFood has been on the positively receiving end of that. So they're quite happy with that. They have, the two companies, Grab and Gojek, has been rumored to on a discussion to merge. I think for the past few years, 2-3 years. The first time I heard it, I think it was 3 years ago. It just doesn't work, and the leadership is. I have a good source in one of the companies involved, and it's a leadership issue. So it's I don't want to say it's an ego issue, but the CEO is basically the company, right? There's a lot of things need to be ironed out, especially for companies with a almost very similar business model. I honestly cannot imagine the two companies merge because that would be brutal. The integration, like there's so many point of contact between two companies in terms of the integration that could potentially be conflict, and that's just a recipe for disaster.
That's right. So that's one of the questions that I was going to ask, actually. The reason why I mentioned Gojek in this episode is because it has been involved in potential merger talks with Grab and also Tokopedia. And so let's start with Grab first, right? We talked about how the synergies between them are probably the best based on the similar industries that they're in. And of course, the merger will bring the wars of ride hailing, of food delivery to an end. You think they're not going to come to an agreement, right? I mean, based on a recent article that I read on Business Times Singapore, the merger talks have fallen apart, actually. Do you think it's, due to long-term animosity between the companies, or is it really, like you said, it's similar to an ego issue?
Ego aside, I think monopoly, it only works for products where the users or the customers don't pay, right? Companies like Facebook, like Twitter, like Clubhouse, for example, right? It's free to use. They monetize some from different business model. In that sense, it's very possible for a company to become the dominant player. But for companies like Gojek and Grab, where people have to pay for something to get a service or a utility value, it's actually duopoly is the best scenario you can possibly have. It's almost impossible for a company like that to become a monopoly. It's very hard to become a monopoly. I think the one case that happened is Microsoft. Other than that, there's no other companies has been able to do that. Even now, Microsoft has lots of competitors, right? It's perfectly okay, and I don't think they should push for a merger just because to prevent the price war. Because at the end of the day, the consumer benefits from the competition is really up to the regulators from each countries that both companies are in to really regulate the business model or the price ceiling or the bottom pricing for both companies to make them both become more profitable and more sustainable in that particular market. In Indonesia, particularly, that already exists. We have a bottom pricing regulation from the government. The drivers can actually get some benefit as well. The consumers pay slightly more expensive, but we're happy because it's government regulated anyway, right? Grab or both Grab and Gojek cannot go beyond that or below that price just because they want to compete with each other. So it benefits everyone. In
Yeah,
other markets, it might be the case.
It does remind me of the time when Uber China and Didi, they merged. But since then, a lot of other ride-hailing companies have sprung up, and it was never, a true monopoly. So I understand your point. Pivoting back to the conversation about Tokopedia, though, do you think Tokopedia would be a better suitor for Gojek instead? And if so, why?
For me, it fits like a glove because it's complementary. So it's not Tokopedia has, Gojek doesn't have. And it goes the other way around as well. So they complete each other in a lot of sense. A lot of people have been, they both have SME merchants, but it's actually a very different type of merchant. Gojek with their GoFood merchant is focused on kind of ready to eat products, right? You get it delivered, immediately consume whatever food that you're ordering. While the food merchant in Tokopedia is not the ready to eat model. So it's like frozen food, spices and all that stuff. So it's very different type of merchants, right? And Tokopedia is also dominated by electronics, by fashion, by handicrafts, kind of merchants that Gojek doesn't have. So combined, both entity will own a very large market share, the SME market. The other point of contact as well is the payment. Gojek has GoPay and Tokopedia has OVO, or at least own almost half in OVO, right? But regulatory rules here in Indonesia, Tokopedia cannot hold shares for both OVO and GoPay if they decided to merge. So they have to, Tokopedia will have to lose one, and obviously it's going to be OVO kicked on the side, and maybe sell the shares back to Grab. I don't see any potential problem there, even if they decided to merge. Lots of synergy because again, the consumer is already used to pay for convenience fee both in Gojek and Tokopedia. And of course, I think the potential alignment is a hyperlocal, super speedy delivery like Amazon Prime. So you order something on Tokopedia and deliver it within 15 minutes.
Wow.
Using GoSend, their logistic arm, Gojek's logistic arm, right? In a way, this already happened in Gojek alone. I used to buy whatever, like, items like wine and stuff like that. And if I get a merchant that is very close to where I live, it's delivered in less than 30 minutes after the transaction. That's just on the Tokopedia side alone. And they could use Gojek or they can use Grab to deliver the item. But now with, potentially the two companies can merge, that integration should become more seamless. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is exciting from the merger.
That 15 minutes, under 30 minutes, that's crazy. Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially those, living in some geographically larger countries like Canada or the US, are probably going to be very amazed at the speed.
I live in a quite, city area. But if the company decided to merge, all the consumer in a relatively kind of suburb kind of area can benefit the same way as well, not just people in the city.
I understand. And you kind of answered this question of mine already, but if this were to actually happen, how would a Tokopedia and Gojek merger really work though?
Yeah, I mean, merger is hard. No matter what company is doing it, there's going to be a restructuring. There's going to be a round of layoff and efficiency checklist. It's expected, right? It will happen. But I think combined power with the potential synergy, as I said, they really complete each other. Potentially that could add lots more value, as a single entity, right? 1+1=4, which is actually literally the case in Gojek and Tokopedia. I think I read on Bloomberg a few days back, the proposed single company after merger is actually a $40 billion,
Wow.
which is crazy, right? Because Gojek is $10 billion, Tokopedia is $7.5 billion, but combined they're $40 billion.
That's crazy.
I'm not sure 40 is, the exact number that will pique investors' interest. There's a lot of factors that comes into deciding the valuation, but I understand that combined they are stronger together, especially, they become a more competition to Shopee. And I think it's going to be ignorant if we don't talk about Shopee in this scenario because, I'm sure Shopee has been one of the key factors in even creating the discussion between Tokopedia and Gojek because, Shopee has been a major competitor for both companies. They have Shopee Pay, which is now the largest payment company in Indonesia, at least. They have, Shopee Pay, which is a direct threat to GoPay, but they also, one of the largest e-commerce company, I think number one right now above Tokopedia. So it's also a threat to Tokopedia. So, and they're a single company, right? By merging both, I think the combined entity will have a chance to actually go head to head with Shopee, push for domination in the Indonesian market.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? The potential competition between Shopee and its potential a new merged company.
Sure. Shopee exists in a lot of countries as well. Definitely one of the largest e-commerce companies in Southeast Asia, a subsidiary of SEA. They launched in Indonesia in 2017 and has been on a rocket ship, basically, just smashing everyone else. And they've taken the number one spot in late 2018, which is incredibly fast for any company. The growth is immense. They've acquired merchants from Tokopedia here and there, from other e-commerce companies as well. They've been, doing a massive kind of marketing campaign to acquire users, do a lot of discounts, promotions, brand ambassadors, the K-pop thing. They spend a lot of money here in Indonesia. Rightfully so. They're now number one in commerce and number one in payment with their Shopee Pay platform. Shopee Pay in 2020 has been they launched it early 2020, and then it got hit by the pandemic, and people would probably assume everyone's gonna, hit the brakes, right? Not for Shopee. You can buy coffee in, the coffee chains here that supports Shopee Pay for 1 rupiah. That's insane. I cannot even translate that to USD or SGD because it's not even 1 cent,
Yeah,
right? That's 0.1 cent
that's crazy.
Singapore dollar. It's basically nothing, right? Their marketing strategy has been insane. Therefore, the market share has been growing really, really fast. And in just almost a year, they are currently number one, above GoPay, above OVO. Combined with their e-commerce platform, it's become a prominent competition for both Tokopedia from the e-commerce side and Gojek on the payment side.
It's interesting that Shopee, just like Grab, are both Singaporean companies. So this brings me to my next question, which is, if we see two homegrown unicorns such as Tokopedia and Gojek merge together, do you think it will make it harder for future, Southeast Asian companies like Grab or Shopee to enter Indonesia in the future? And we kind of see that in China these days, and to some extent India as well, where foreign companies have a increasingly hard time entering the market.
I think Indonesian homegrown founders need to be the pioneer in the sense that they need to identify which areas to explore. Companies like Gojek, they identify the payment sector first, right? They identify that, oh, we have to go to payment. And then Grab follow on with Grab Pay, and then OVO came, Dana came, and everyone else follow. Tokopedia and their SME strategy is also the same. They identify that SME is the next big thing, the next market, and they started doing that before anyone else does, and now everyone is following footstep, right? So in terms of identifying problems, the needs and the demand of the market, homegrown founders, they know best because they're based here. They know the culture very, very well. They're a part of that culture as well. So it's relatively easier for them to identify what problems in the market and identify new demands and business opportunities. But when it comes to execution, it all comes back to the capital and the speed of that execution, right? You can identify that SME is the next big thing, but if someone else have more money, more capital, and can hire really some of the best people that, for the execution phase, they can be, they can overlap you and become number one before you even get there. So I think it's a combination of both when it comes to identifying the problems and actually executing the solution. Indonesian founders, they definitely have the chance to be able to execute, but Indonesia is still dependent on foreign talents in order to actually fully execute the solution, right? So a lot of expats has been hired by Tokopedia, by Gojek. Some of them are fully expats. Some of them are Indonesians who went to school in the US or in Europe, and then incentivized to go back home to Indonesia, and with all these patriotic issue, personal passion, nationalization or Indonesia patriotism, join Gojek and Tokopedia to fight against all these quote unquote foreigners, right? Shopee, Grab, and all that stuff. And they definitely have the chance, and it all comes back to the capital and how well we can translate that capital into, growth.
Yeah. What do you think this kind of a merger between, say, Gojek and Tokopedia would mean for the Indonesian tech community in the long term?
Yeah, I talk about this with, some of my friends in both companies. I remind them that you guys need to acquire more local people to support your growth. I think this has been a big part of Tokopedia's growth as well as Gojek. Yeah, they acquired a lot of local companies as well. But I kind of, the industry needs them to be that company that acquires the rest of us, or at least supports the rest of us. Like Google in Silicon Valley back in the day, fast growing startups acquired by Google, right? That's, I think every month they acquire a company for like a few first years. Gojek and Tokopedia needs to do that, and in order to give full benefit to the ecosystem, a lot of companies who work for Gojek or Tokopedia, 2 years ago, they left the companies, now started their own company, grow, and then acquired, and then they would stay in that company and then become a serial entrepreneur. So I think that's the ideal scenario. If they start acquiring local companies, they would force to shape the serial entrepreneurship ecosystem, but also the wealth creation actually
Yes.
triggers the angel investment scene here in Indonesia, because I think right now the angel investment scene in Indonesia is not there yet. Unfortunately, it's not as fast as like the one in China or in the
Mhm.
US. A lot of people got money, right? That's, of course, but not a lot of people actually put that money back into the ecosystem by either starting up a new company or investing in or angel investing in startups. So hopefully with Gojek and Tokopedia combined entity, keep acquiring local companies and keep churning, good quality talent that would really significantly help the industry grow even faster.
I think these days will come. Just by looking at the history of, Silicon Valley and then what's been happening in China in the past decade, I do believe the days that you've described, they will come. And my last question would be, because you're so familiar with Gojek and Tokopedia, what do you see the future of these two companies be like, whether they merge or not, if you can, describe your vision a little bit for us?
They can potentially become again, the Google of Indonesia, in a way that in terms of business, they are, very well diversified. They have not just absorbed talent, but also put out a huge amount of talent outside of the company as well, via trainings, via experience in their company. So the people who work hopefully can become an entrepreneur. So quote unquote graduating from Gojek and Tokopedia. It's like the PayPal mafia. I don't know if you're familiar with the PayPal
Yes.
mafia, but
Yes.
right, I think Gojek and Tokopedia can potentially be PayPal in that day to Indonesia today. It's kind of started already. See some ex Gojek and ex Tokopedia founders starting up new companies and angel investing. But hopefully, the merger, if that happens, it can exacerbate that process even faster. And even if the merger don't happen, hopefully they can still acquire companies and really make a good positive impact to the industry and become, again, like the Google, like the PayPal of Indonesia.
Yeah, and I can't wait to, follow up on the story because I do think that it's very exciting. And, going back to what you talked about, the changes in the Indonesian startup scene as well, I think that the future is very bright, right? And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of exciting stories coming out from the Indonesian community. And we would love to, hear your thoughts, continued thoughts on these topics as well, which means you'll have to come back more often, Rama.
I would be happy to.
And so my last question would be, can you recommend a book, a podcast, or anything else that has, impacted your work and personal life recently?
One of my favorite podcasts is actually, you're listening to it now, Analyze Asia. So
Thank you.
that's a must have, must listen kind of podcast. Also, I read lots of books on entrepreneurship, and I always recommend this book to both founders and investors, where even non-founders and non-investors. Just a very good book to read, and I'm sure most of you guys already read it as well. It's called Free Economics.
Mhm.
It's an amazing book using economics principles to understand how the world works.
Mhm.
Amazing, and it's really life changing for me. I love that book. The second book would be Alibaba, the house that Jack Ma built, by Duncan Clark. Also a very good. I like the biographies, for entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and all that stuff. But reading about Jack Ma is kind of closer to home, a more
Mm.
Asian kind of culture. So I'm very happy with that book. Really, it's, yeah, you have to read that book.
Understood. I think I only read about Jack Ma's story in Chinese, so I'd be curious to read this English biography. And I think the author of Freakonomics has a podcast as well. And how can my audience find you if they would like to, hear more about what you have to say, or, see your tweets, or learn more about DailySocial?
Sure. So you can go to dailysocial.id, the website, keep tab on what's happening here in Indonesia, in the tech sector in Indonesia. But I also have a Twitter account, RAMPOK, Rampok. That's my Twitter, and my Clubhouse account. It's like the new big thing these days, Clubhouse. So I'm there. But all else fail, you can email me at Rama, Rama, at dailysocial.id.
And you can find Analyze Asia on all podcasting platforms. And you can always let us know your thoughts about this episode and any previous episodes by messaging us on Twitter. And our Twitter handle is Analyze Asia. That is Analyze with an S. Now, this is the end of our episode with Rama, and I would like to thank Rama again for coming onto the show and providing us such a complete perspective on what's happening in Indonesia with Grab, with Gojek, with Tokopedia, Shopee, etc. And I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. We can't wait for you to come back again.
Thanks for having me again, Carol.